thoughtful ideas and suggestions for guests and topics.
Events, programs, and
Welcome to this week's segment of Dialogue Houston. I'm your host, Laurence Payne. To our regular viewing audience, welcome. To those joining us perhaps for the first time here for ACC's TV Dialogue Houston, we can be found now every Tuesday and Thursday at 6 a.m., again at 6 p.m., Saturday afternoons at 3 p.m. As always, on top of the hour, let me thank you for your thoughtful calls, emails, and text messages concerning previous shows we've aired here on ACC's TV Dialogue Houston, now proudly in its 27th season. And now, since this is your community affairs, public affairs show, we welcome guest topics and subjects to be covered on upcoming segments of the show. As we know, as we reach the end of 2020, and for many who say it can't come too soon, there are a lot of surprises yet to be had in 2020, including starting the day after the election day until January 20th, when we swear in whoever the president will be. And that kind of takes us through what we call the 78 days coming forward from darkness to light, or the in-between time as we go forward. And so we wanted to start off and go forward at a show this time. And I'm picking my words here a little carefully because I want to start off in a moment of silence, if you will, in honoring of Sergeant Harold Preston. Sergeant Preston, as you know, is the HPD officer who we memorialized and funeralized just this week in a grand way because he deserved it. 41 years on the police force, 2 weeks away from retirement. And I got to meet Sergeant Preston on numerous occasions. We live in the same neighborhood. He lives a few blocks from where I live. And he was just a grand person, grand human being, a grand person, a servant leader, a true gentle giant and gentle soul. And as an example, a shining example of what we need and want in our HPD officers. So if you'd be with me, Zoom-wise, just a little quiet moment of silence in remembrance of Sergeant Preston. So, as you also know, I've had the privilege of chairing Mayor Turner's task force on policing reform. And one of the things that have come with that is a wonderful opportunity to take part in a class, in a course just last week at the Police Academy that deals with what else? Building trust from trauma. And that course couldn't be more timely, couldn't be more apropos. We're calling it, I and my wonderful guest who I'm going to introduce in a moment, we're calling it the first fruits of the task force report on police reform. If the course hadn't already been put together and wasn't here, we'd have to develop it and put it on. So it's already here, and that's the beauty of it. And it's all about keeping the shine on the badge. I love that phrase. This course is really, in many ways, for the officers, but it's also for the community, so the officers can do a better job on how to interact with our community. Keeping the shine on the badge. And to help us understand where this course came from, and to understand the history and background of it, and to tell us a little bit about the course, I'm so pleased and happy to have Assistant Chief Sheryl Victorian, who is the Assistant Chief of the Patrol Region, 2nd Command, who is the architect behind this course, along with a lot of other people, but she's very modest. She said a lot of other people also helped her, but it always takes one spark to get it started and to lay the foundation. Chief Victorian, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate this opportunity to talk about this great course.
So tell us, how did this start?
So building trust from trauma originated with me, the idea back in 2017. I had the opportunity to attend the Federal Bureau of Investigation's National Academy, and one of the required field trips was a visit to the Holocaust Museum. So the purpose of that visit to the Holocaust Museum was for us to understand our capacity as law enforcement officers to rationalize our behaviors. And so it was a very impactful visit to the Holocaust, right? And so the following year, I was asked to participate in a police exchange program in Poland. And little did I know, part of the agenda for that trip was a visit to Auschwitz. So my visit to the museum before just kind of exasperated into being on the actual grounds of where these horrible events happen. And so the idea for the course came to me again then. I started to think, so what would happen to policing and building trust in those communities, specifically African American communities where there's a lot of mistrust, if we understood the roles that police officers played historically and why there's so much mistrust that's being, passed, whether it's passed down from generation to generation or even the policing behaviors that may be passed down. So that was the impetus for the class. And this year after George Floyd, I thought, what a better time than now? Why am I sitting on this? Or maybe I had been sitting on it because this was the appropriate time for us to have this class. And so I got with some community partners. We worked with the Collective Experience Group, who had partnered with us on the Collective Healing Grant for the past couple of years. Professor Brown, I'm sorry, I always call her doctor, she should be. Professor Aubrey Brown from the University of Houston and her team, as well as the design team from HPD. It was a very diverse design team from all different ranks, all different backgrounds that helped put together a class that we could present to our officers that would be well received and well understood.
And I can tell you by sitting in on the class just a week ago that you truly achieved your goal. It is a wonderful class laid out in a thoughtful way, in a very followable way to allow them to enter into it and to get the feel of it. The morning is really the background, the building up to the context, and the afternoon is the history. But let's talk about why this is so important at this time in history. And you touched on it in a post-George Floyd reality. And I might even add now in a Sergeant Harold Preston's reality. Yes. So now we have both, two young men from Jack Yates High School. And so I'm kind of, God has a great sense of humor. She always comes through. In that, who knew that you would have that reality and now this reality, two young men from the same high school, to now talk about policing in the community and the two views that we must have that must not be one view. Those two views must become one view of how we see each other in that community.
Exactly. You make a great point with that. I just don't believe in coincidence. I believe that the timing for this is perfect, and the circumstances, as tragic as they may be, will help us to move into a different direction. What I didn't mention was that we have civilian partners teaching this class with us, and we have had an overwhelming support from our community members to come out and be trained on how to instruct this course to police officers. So we co-facilitated so that the citizens will have a role and have a voice, as well as our police officers. When we talk about the trust building and trust eroding events that happen, not just nationally, but those that were specific to the city of Houston, and how we can heal and build better relationships after those tragic incidents.
Because we know that trust and trauma happens on both sides. It happens with community members, it happens with police officers. And it is, as you said so well, all about relationships. Building relationships built on mutual trust and respect, maintaining those relationships built on mutual trust and respect, because nothing happens without trust. Nothing happens without trust. Nothing. And that is the cornerstone of the building block from which you can develop community relations. You can develop all these things we talk about, community orientating policing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But the building block, the cornerstone, is that trust development.
Yes, sir. And something that's very, very key about that is that our mission says that we need to work cooperatively with the public. And in an effort to work cooperatively with the public, we have to have a level of trust. And I love, Chief Acevedo has brought this philosophy of relational policing to the Houston Police Department, and I love it because the foundation is a relationship. And in order to build relationships, there are several things that you have to have in order to build that trust. And he used the acronym TREAT. And that T is transparency, that R is respect. We have to build emotional capital. We have to be engaged. We have to hold our officers, ourselves, and our community accountable. And all of that transparency, respect, emotional capital, engagement, and accountability builds that trust for us to be able to work cooperatively with our communities.
And the history of policing, as we know, and we'll talk more about that as we go on in the show here today, is an interesting one that has roots and foundations going back to slavery. When the first team of officers, not known as police officers, not even known as marshals back then, they were known as slave catchers. To return the slaves to their owners, their property to their owners.
Yes,
and later on, even when it was after emancipation, when slaves were freed, to try to still catch some freed slaves and return them back to their owners. And that took us then into Reconstruction, and into the Jim Crow era, and policing over time from the marshal to the police, who were actually, as you said, started off in the role of guardians to protect and serve, and somewhere along the line became warriors, and then somewhere along the line became more militaristic. And you add all those things to it, you begin to have this void and chasm between the community and the police that really should never have been there, but we understand historically how it happened and why it happened.
Yes, sir. Sir Robert Peel, that's not what he designed policing to be.
Nope.
He designed policing to be to prevent crime and not to catch criminals, right? To earn the support of our communities. And by earning that support, that was the key to preventing crime. And then finally, we earn that respect by respecting our communities. We earn the support from our communities by respecting our communities. So you're right, that's not where we started.
And it should be a proactive organization that has turned into having to be a reactive organization.
Yes.
Because of where we are now. Let's be clear. We as a society has helped do that to policing and to police officers, because we've dumped on them everything that we as a society does not want to take care of, do not want to take ownership of, do not want to fess up to, do not want to fund, do not want to help take care. We don't want to do anything you want, but just don't raise my taxes.
Right.
Well, you can't have it both ways. So in this moment here that we're in before elections and even after this election, let's talk for a moment about democracy and citizenship. There are 5 tenets of what it means to be a citizen living in a democracy. My individual rights and privileges. That's the great I and me discussion. I have that discussion all day. It's all about me, right? I mean, see, it's about you. But what about the 3 of the other 5 tenets of what it means to be a citizen living in a democracy? Our common duties, obligations, and responsibilities. To whom? The other. Define the other increasingly in our society, someone different than me, someone who does not look like me. And of course, there's the rub. So if we take both of those together and realize that we as a society, in the era of poverty, healthcare, unemployment, child care, children having to be taught at home, food insecurity, job insecurity, not a great minimum wage as it should be, mental health issues, crisis intervention, homelessness. Whose lap is all that dumped into now but policing?
Police officers.
Not society. We don't want to take care of it. We don't want to fund it. We don't want to admit it. We don't want to have ownership of it. So we let the police take care of it. And that is not the role of policing. So now that we've dumped everything on the police, we haven't funded them properly. We haven't, I'm not going to use the bad word.
Please
we have
don't.
not redeployed, reallocated, redirected the funds to help them get the people they need, whether it's more social workers to be with them on their calls, or whatever it may be. So I understand, as many of us do, why we are where we are. But the question becomes, and this is where I turn back to the chief, that we're trying to get out of that. And we're trying to get out of that mentality, and we're trying to redirect and look at how we do things differently going forward. This course is a big beginning and start to that. If you don't know your history, you're doomed for failure.
Yes.
So my history informs my present, so I can have a greater and brighter future together tomorrow.
So, yes, sir. I think that building trust from trauma is the beginning of us understanding our roles and the roles that we have in order to improve not just policing, but our respect and understanding of the community. And as well, and I think in building that respect, we may get the understanding that we need from our community, that those are not our responsibilities, that there are some things that probably should have never been put on policing, that's been put on policing, that we're now being responsible to take care of, and we're not thoroughly equipped to do without the proper training or the proper resources.
Right.
But wearing this badge is pretty heavy, and it comes with a lot of responsibility. So our officers, and I truly believe that our officers do the best that they can in managing what we have. But at the same time, it can put us in a position to where we're not successful if we don't have the resources that we need to accomplish those tasks.
And I'm always reminded in my little moment in time that I had to, and grateful for not knowing how it was going to prepare me for things later on. I got to be a reserve police officer for the East St. Louis Police Department for about 3 years. And so I had my own squad car, I wore my uniform, I had my badge and my gun. I'm the same person during the day, serving as Vicar for Urban Affairs for the Diocese of Belleville, Illinois. And then in the evening, when I had my turn to serve in uniform with the badge and gun, I became a different person because people saw me so differently. I'm the same human being in civilian clothes that you saw during the day. And now all of a sudden, and I got it. I begin to see and understand, experience it firsthand, what that visual thing of you showing up with that badge and gun on, it changes everything. And so I respect that. I understand that. And I wish that citizens, and maybe a little bit through the Citizens Academy and other things that y'all do, citizens can understand how that changes the reality.
Yes.
But back to the main point. Since we live in Houston, Texas, and our police department of 5,200 officers is trying to police this spread out city, it's too big for anybody. And as Stephen Kleinberg, our friend at Rice, tells us all the time, we live in the most diverse city in America. But what we don't talk about, we live in the most segregated city in America because of income. We live in the most gated community of America. And so what's happening is, in the second era of the resegregation of our public schools, and that's true, the second era of the resegregation of our public schools, and now that the racial minorities are now the majority in this community, so the majority is now the minorities. So we live in a majority minority city. All of that plays into how now the role of policing, and that was all before a pandemic. And now you add a pandemic on top of it, and people are out of work, people are trying to feed their babies, people don't have jobs, people, Chief, I just, your jobs were always so difficult. Now they're even 10 times, it seems, more difficult.
But think about this too, Mr. Payne. Everything that you just described, and you said it earlier that we are humans too. A
Yep.
lot of our officers are going through the exact
same thing,
right, that they're responding to. So
right.
We have that extra added stress that we're supposed to set aside when we put this uniform on and get in that patrol car to address those issues. So, which, it's difficult to do. We do our best with it, and we have, support teams around us to help us with it, but we're human too. And
yeah.
what I try to tell officers all the time, and we made it a part of this course too, is that this is nothing personal. I think I said it in my video. The issues that some of the communities have with us, or communities of color have with us, are not personal. It's not that they're taking it out against Sheryl. It's against what this uniform has come to represent over the past couple of, past decades. So it's very important. But yeah, you're right. We deal with the same issues.
What I've always said, because of that balance of equation, that we're all human beings and living different perspectives, looking at it from different perspectives, we're going through a lot of the same things, if we're honest. When that call for 911 goes out, when the officer sees the citizen many times on their worst day. That's the need to call 911. The officer responding, however, shows up with all the compound trauma from the past encounters and past experiences. So I'm seeing you on my worst day because I have to call you, so something must really be bad if I got to call 911.
Right.
The human being on the other end, known as the police officer, is showing up with so much of other things that have compounded that, responding to that call and how they see that call because of the trauma they've witnessed on the other call and the service. People don't realize that trauma, and that's why this course is so aptly named, that trauma builds up.
It's called vicarious trauma. It's vicarious trauma.
I love it.
Yes, sir. We respond to fatality accidents. We respond to shootings. We respond to children being killed in car accidents. That is traumatic for
Yep.
even our officers. And I think that now, as an agency, thanks to Chief Acevedo and him coming up with the peer support and make sure we expanded our peer support unit, that we have the resources available to say, okay, a supervisor get on the scene. Okay, this was a bad event. I need to have peer support contact this off, even if it's just a conversation, so that that officer doesn't try to self-medicate or takes it with them to the next call, and it ends up coming out in an unprofessional manner when they're addressing other citizens. So
Yep.
you're exactly right. We're compounded with the calls that we've seen before when we get to that next 911 call.
Because after all, they're human beings too,
They're human
just
beings.
like the rest of us. That's the
Yes,
piece
sir.
that keep, I think the chief and I are going to be on the same theme, but that's the piece that gets lost in all of this.
Mhm.
And that's why it's so important to hold this up. So let's talk a little bit about the course itself. Kind of walk us through the course, and then of course I want to get to that history part, because that's really where it all comes home.
Okay, the first part of the morning is really very interactive. We have what we call PASEO activities. And in those activities, we talk about why this report, we have the officers to reflect on why this course or why this profession was important to them. Why did they become police officers? And then secondly, we start addressing trauma. We address those officers, the personal traumas or the traumas that they may have seen while on the job. And then we talk about community trauma, that same trauma that we've experienced. Isn't it possible for our communities to have these traumas? And we talk about different traumatic events. And then we talk about trust. We come in with the trust and why trust matter and why trust building is required in our job, specifically in HPD. And we talked about that earlier with our mission, being able to work cooperatively with the public to accomplish our goals. And then we go on to talk about procedural justice. We talked about procedural justice for the past several years, I think since like 2014, and we've had classes on procedural justice. We talk about fairness in the process. We talk about transparency, giving the civilians voice, and we talk about impartiality in our decisions and making sure our decisions are fair. And then we talk about, we go to lunch and we have lunch, and then we come back from lunch and we start talking about active listening and perspective taking, and the importance of active listening and perspective taking. And we have another exercise where we talk about both. And then we start talking about professional resilience, because as we mentioned a little earlier, we have to bounce back from our different calls. We have to bounce back from burying a colleague, from being killed in the line of duty, and continue to respond to calls. We don't have the liberty to just take the police department, take off for 2 or 3 days to deal with our colleagues' deaths. We have to get right back out there and respond to those same calls in which, Sergeant Preston was killed, right? So we talk about professional resiliency. And what I really love about this course is that we got everybody involved. You notice that the class started off with the chief, and then our executive chiefs give a perspective about building trust from trauma. We have Chief Slinker that introduces the afternoon and talk about why it is important that we talk about history. And then we have Chief Fenner at the end of the day wrapping it up and giving us our marching orders. So after we talk about the professional resilience, we go into that history. It's brief, but it's heavy. And we want and a lot of officers that are in the room, they don't even realize, don't even know about some of the history of the Houston Police Department and some of those specific historical trust eroding events that happen right here in Houston in the neighborhoods that they're patrolling every day, that they may not have known these events happened in. So that's how we end the day. We end the day with that historical piece, and with every trust eroding event, fortunately, the Houston Police Department has been proactive and have come back and tried to have a trust building event, or we came back with a trust building event. And to me, the overall focus of this course now is for us to be proactive now to reduce those trust eroding events, so that we can have more trust building events and build bridges.
Well said. And it's a wonderful course. It will get you, I think, where you're trying to go and with your ultimate goals as you get through everyone going through the course. It is a wonderful opportunity for the police officers to understand even their own organization and their brand and their mission and how they got there, and in some cases how and why they're perceived the way they're perceived from a historical perspective. And as you said, it's really not personal. And I've learned that it's really not personal. It has more to do with that uniform than it does with the person in the uniform. And I think people react to that without even knowing the human being, because I can tell you from chairing the task force on police reform and talking to countless citizens about their police and talking to police officers, both current and retired, the human being inside the uniform that people love. Everybody who says the police that I know, love, and well, I know them well, and I love them. Because they're my friend, they're my buddy, they're another person, human being. It's the one that I don't know that shows up in that uniform, who has an attitude that causes me my ills. And I think they're able to make that distinction. Citizens are very good now at making that distinction. Like you said, it's about respect, it's about trust, but it's both ways. It works both ways. So we're about out of time. Unfortunately, we could go on with this, knowing you and I, for about another hour and get deeply into it. I want to thank you for being on Dialogue Houston. We're going to continue this discussion, I'm sure, in the months to come. We'll do some follow-up together and see where we go. But I really want to thank you for being on Dialogue Houston in such a timely way that we've been able to address this at a time when I think Houston, all citizens and police department both need this going forward together. So thank you again, Chief Victorian. I want to also say thank you to Chief Acevedo, to Chief Finner, to Chief Slankert, who've been really, really helpful throughout this whole process of the reform and the task force report. To the men and women of HPD, both current officers and retired officers who I heard a lot from over these last few months, I want to thank you. And it's important that we learn our history so we can apply it to the present, so that we can have a brighter and better future together going forward, so that we can live together safer in Houston and feel everyone has that sense of safe and being well taken care of. To all citizens, and it means all citizens need to work with the police department. Police department need to work with all citizens. We all have a role to play. We all have a part of this reform movement. It is a change process, and any change process takes time. Over time, as we develop and nurture these relationships going forward of mutual trust and respect, we will get there. If you have not read the task force report, please do so. You can find it on the City of Houston's website under boards and commissions. And we look forward to everyone engaging with us as we together grow Houston, as we together grow our Houston Police Department, as we together understand the role that we each have to play, and that we can do it in a way that allows the lifting up of all human beings involved, both the citizen and the police officer. It is a goal that is achievable because we know that we had it. We've seen highlights of it throughout history. We've seen times and periods where one was one and we worked together and we supported each other. And we knew we knew the cop on the beat. We knew the cop who walked. We knew the cop who rode the bicycle. We knew the cop who was in our neighborhood. We even knew the cop's cell phone number to call on that particular beat and unit and section of town. We knew all of that. We had all of that. We need to get back to that. It's that simple, but it's a two-way street. So I want to thank you all for being part of Dialogue Houston for this week. We look forward to you joining us in weeks to come. And as always, be well, stay safe, and until then, peace, power, and love.